What's up, SnowTrax Nation? Luke here. We are at the Arctic Cat 2025, basically new model intro, but not really new model intro. What we're here seeing is the new motor, and this isn't a secret. Everybody's expected a new motor from Arctic Cat to go in the Catalyst. They kind of let it slip and hinted at it pretty obviously when they released the Catalyst last season, but we finally get to see it, get to touch it, like right now, find out the dimensions, what it is, and I'm here to tell you all about it. So what we got sitting in front of us here is the new 858 C-Tech 2 from Arctic Cat. And this motor isn't just a reworked 800, this is an all-new motor from the ground up, employing all kinds of new technology, really interesting stuff from Arctic Cat, things that nobody's ever done before. One of the most important features of this motor, though, is how it mounts in the chassis. And that was something we talked about with the 600 in the Catalyst last year, is that Arctic Cat was able to move that motor incredibly low and as far back as you could get it into the bulkhead. Well, the 858 actually takes that one step further, and it mounts even lower. Literally as low as a motor can possibly mount in a snowmobile is where this engine is mounted, with special integrated engine mounts into the bottom of the case. And then also the engine is tipped back a little further so that it sits even further back against the bulkhead, further towards the rider, meaning that this sled has a let me get this right. I gotta remember all these numbers because there's a lot of numbers. It's a 3/4 inch lower center of gravity than the 600 even, which has an incredibly low center of gravity. So that is very, very impressive. It is an actual 858. That is the actual displacement. I think that's a super cool number. And Arctic Cat's reasoning behind that number, there's gonna be a lot of people who say, well, how come they didn't go 860? How come they didn't go, 880 or 900 or whatever? Everybody's gonna have those questions. And there's a very, very good reason that makes a lot of sense. And I really like Arctic's answer to this. They found the 858, that displacement was the right balance between lightweight and horsepower. Now they could make a larger displacement engine that made more power. They have admitted openly that yes, that is possible. However, in doing so, you would have to have a bigger crank, a bigger crankcase, bigger bearings, etc., etc. So the weight gain of going to a larger displacement engine strictly for the sake of getting more horsepower would mean that the engine got heavier and the overall sled got heavier. And here's why it's really important that they didn't do that. The 858 powered Catalyst is actually lighter than the 600 Catalyst as a complete sled. The engine itself is 4% lighter than the 600. The overall sled will be in that neighborhood, 4% lighter. Now take that into consideration. You've got a sled that's already famous. The Catalyst 600 is already well known and famous for its lightweight, its centralized mass, its center of gravity. All of those things are what make the Catalyst amazing. This motor, this sled, the 858 powered Catalyst, is going to have more horsepower, lower center of gravity, and lighter weight, which means in every possible way, it will be a better performing snowmobile, better handling snowmobile. That's a little bit mind-blowing when you really stop to think about it. Some of the cool technologies they've used here in this motor that change how things work, and I'm gonna have to read these, I'm sorry, normally I try and memorize them for you, but I just can't. It has a larger crankcase, a longer stroke, it's 85 millimeter bore. So the engine is actually over square, and the reason they did that was because they could keep the cylinders with the same size bore as the 800, the 85 millimeter bore. They could keep the cylinders the same width as the previous motor. So not to increase the size of the engine, the overall physical size of the engine, but increase displacement with a longer bore. So that was the reason that they went that direction with that motor. They say that it revs just as fast as the old 800, but makes more torque all through the power band, which is really, really cool. Something we've all liked about Arctic's 800s is that they're really snappy, fast revving engines. You don't lose that with the 858, you just gain more power overall. The other thing that they've done here, now we've always known about Arctic power valves. That's something that they've always had as their power valve. In the past, the way their power valves worked was it was a spring-loaded system that held the valve closed, and then an actuator pulled the valve open, and the spring pulled it back. So the actuator was actually only a one-direction actuator. It pulled against the spring, and the spring was responsible for returning it. What this meant is that there wasn't as precise control over where that power valve ended up and how they controlled it. In this system, they have what they're calling a two-way actuated power valve, or a push-pull power valve. And what that means is that this power valve gets pulled and pushed each direction as the engine, the ECU is calling for that. So basically there's a servo in here that controls the way that this works, and it's a servo in the grander sense of the term, in that it actually goes 2 directions. So they have very specific control over this actuator in terms of tuning. The ECU is what controls that, and it is 3 positions, but those 3 positions are very precisely monitored, which is really, really cool. And what this does is it improves the low end torque and the overall efficiency of the engine. So you're talking about an engine that they're claiming is going to be more efficient and have even more torque than just its extra displacement would normally offer. So I mentioned this before, it has 11% more power. That is the claim. We're not getting a horsepower claim at this moment, but the claim is that it has 11% more horsepower than the 800. So you can make your assumptions about that. I mean, people would argue that the old 800 Arctic Cat made somewhere in the neighborhood of 160 horsepower at best. So you're somewhere in the neighborhood of 170-ish horsepower here, maybe a little over that, 175, depending on whose dyno you're using, of course. And that's why they won't make an official claim, because everybody's dyno is different. So I respect that, but 11% is a lot more power. In fact, I think it's pretty close to what Polaris claimed about their 850 over their 800, was that it was 11% more horsepower. So that's a pretty interesting comparison to make. That's basically the engine. There's a lot of technology built into this engine. You've got V-force reeds and different design features in the 600 in terms of making it mount as low and far back as possible. So this isn't a 600. This isn't the same motor as the 600. It's a new generation of motor built completely different, with different cylinder heads, different bottom end, different crank, different everything, which is pretty interesting because the 600 is actually the old 600 that was fit into the Catalyst, and it just so happened to fit amazing. But I have to assume, and my thoughts might be, that in the future, this might become the new architecture for a new family of motors. So we'll see how that goes, but I wouldn't be surprised if you see more engines built very similar to this design. Overall, the new Catalyst with the 858 is the same sled. There aren't any other changes to the chassis. There's some changes to the clutches, obviously, to handle a larger displacement, more torque and horsepower, but the chassis itself and everything else about the chassis is the same. So stuff we already know, stuff we already love. But that's basically my recap of what this new motor is. Everybody's been waiting for it. We've been dying to know what the engine was made of. What is this thing? What's it going to be? How's it going to look? What are the number claims based on weight, based on horsepower and torque and that sort of stuff? I've given you all the information that I've been given. There will be more information as time goes on, and we'll of course update you with that. But for right now, that's what we know. I'm excited about this. I can't wait. I think this is going to take the Catalyst to a whole nother level. I think this is going to push the Catalyst to be a pretty serious contender against anything else that's out there in terms of power. I think the lightweight, the center of gravity, and the centralized mass are all things that made the Catalyst a very impressive snowmobile, and this is going to take that to another level as well. So I'm pretty excited to get one of these on the snow. Unfortunately for all of us, we're going to have to wait until next winter, but we're going to have a Catalyst 600 to play with this winter, so we can't complain too much. So much like the 600 when it was released last season, the 858 is going to be available in all different configurations of Catalyst. So that means the trail version, the crossover version, and the mountain version. So anybody who is going to want a Catalyst, any kind of performance style rider, whether you're a mountain rider, whether you're a crossover rider or a trail rider, you're going to have access to this sled. And there are some other cool technical things that are coming out from Arctic Cat this season we'll talk about in a little bit, so stay tuned for that.